Thank you all for coming to our final webinar on all of the EU legislative changes for exports. As sort of usual, we're going to do a quick presentation and then there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions whilst me and Chloe are going through the presentation, then please pop them in the Q&A function on the chat there. But if not, we can get to them at the end. You can raise hands and we can do questions that way as well. So second, let me get my screen sorted. Okay, so we're just going to head straight into labelling. So I'll pass over to you, Chloe.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak to you today about labelling and how it relates to the export chain. If you could press enter, please, Jodie. Thank you. So fisheries products may go through multiple processes before reaching the final consumer, and traceability must be maintained throughout. This requires the product to be labelled at every stage, right from landing through to export. A lot means a quantity of fisheries and aquaculture products of a given species of the same presentation and coming from the same relevant geographical area and the same fishing vessel or group of fishing vessels. Labels must be provided at the lot level. That means you don't need to label every individual fish or box of fish. So there's quite a lot of requirements on labelling on landing. If you could press enter for me, please, Jodie. Most of the information required for export is covered under those UK labelling requirements. And the devolved governments are engaging with the catching sector to improve compliance with labelling. We're focusing on the elements required for export. And there is additional detail needed now that we are requesting from the catching sector. So to facilitate trade and export, the key information that we need is the trip dates. So the date the vessel left port to the date that landing began. The gear code or subcategory, for example, OTB or otter bottom trawl. The port of landing and the details of the economic zone, the exclusive economic zone that the fish was caught in, or whether it was caught in an RFMO area or high seas area. There's more detail available on that on a later slide to explain what those things mean. So the MMO has produced a suggested template which can be downloaded from our website. Many of the requirements on it can be pre-filled before it's printed to minimise the amount of work on the key side. Next, please. You might also decide to label a multi-lot trip, in which case within the boxes of fish you'd have an identifier with a unique reference on it. So for example, here we've used the PLN and just a number 01, but there's no set format for that. If you press enter, please. Okay, and then you have a cover label which identifies the unique reference for each species and presentation type, and the weight and all of the rest of the information for the trip is the same and applies to every lot. Fabulous. So as we said, fish must be labelled at all stages of the supply chain. So as a merchant, processor or exporter, you may be responsible for additional requirements from other bodies, such as the Food Standards Agency. So you may need to put on things such as best before dates, ingredient list for processed products, etc. There are changes to the requirements for labels on import to the EU as of the 10th of January. And we can advise on what the legislation is, but not on how it will be enforced in EU ports. Next, please. So again, labelling is at the lot level. And after first sale, lots can be combined. So we believe that you could have a consignment level label on import. We have asked the EU for clarification on that. We haven't had confirmation, unfortunately. Okay, enter please, Jodie. So most of the information needed for export labels is included on your UK labels anyway. The labelling information is required at lot level, and those can be combined lots. And from the 10th of January, your lot level labels will need to include catch certificate numbers. So this is the only significant change on labelling legislation for import into the EU.
Perfect, thank you, Chloe. So I'm just going to do a quick run through of all three of the IUU documents and the changes that the EU have implemented that will be required from January. So for the catch certificate, they have introduced catch dates. They've changed the requirements around catch area. They've introduced fishing gear. They've made some changes to the transport details, and there are some cosmetic changes. So for catch dates, they have introduced the start date as well as the end date. So the start date is defined as the date the vessel left port on the trip the fish was landed. So if this is store pots, it is not the date that they were deployed, it's the date that they are picked up and then landed. And then end date remains the same as the date that's currently recorded, so date landed, and it is the date of the first day of landing if the landing is not complete all in one day. So they have now added some more requirements around catch area. Previously, you only had to enter the FAO area, but they have introduced reference to the exclusive economic zone or high seas areas, as well as any applicable regional fisheries management organisations. So the EEZ it extends out to 200 nautical miles from the coastline or a median line where it meets another country's limits. So on this map here, the light blue section is the UK's EEZ, and then in pink and purple, we have other countries' EEZs. There is the capability to add multiple EEZs to one landing line if a vessel has fished sort of between two different countries' waters. They also require any reference to applicable RFMOs. So regional fisheries management organisations are international organisations established with binding measures for conservation and sustainable management of highly migratory or straddling fish species. The one sort of most common for the UK would be the North East Atlantic Fisheries Commission, so NEAFC. You only need to declare this on your catch certificate if you are fishing in the high seas that are covered by NEAFC. So on this map here, it's those dark blue sections where you would need to reference NEAFC. But if you are fishing in an EEZ, so all of these light blue sections, then you only need to reference that EEZ. And then high seas, they're international marine waters outside of the jurisdiction of any country. So anything that was not in those colours on that map. This is just a yes or no tick box. They have also added fishing gear. So this is a completely new field. So what we've done is added two different drop downs, so you can select from gear category to then find the gear type. But we have predefined lists, and there is guidance of sort of translating the 3-letter codes into those drop downs as well available. And then transport details. So whereas previously we were able to just reference transport documents on a catch certificate without inputting the data on the document itself, the EU have now said that they require that detail to be printed on the catch certificate. So this means that it needs to be manually input on the certificate itself when you're applying for it. So the exporter needs to provide the transport details from the point of export. So this is leaving the UK. We do understand that there are some instances where that is impossible. If it is completely out of the realms of possibility that you have that information, then you are able to enter the transport information known to you at the time of creating your certificate, if that is sort of between your location and the logistics hub, for example. But the aim is to get, where possible, from the point of export transport details printed on the certificate. And once again, this section cannot be left blank at all. So you will not be able to create a certificate without filling in these fields. If you do know additional modes of transport, so you know that your consignment is going to change transport halfway through its journey, then you can add multiple modes of transport onto your document. So you just select yes, and then you enter in the second mode of transport. And you also need to include the point of destination on the catch certificate as well. So this is the final destination within the EU. But if that isn't known, then it can be the first stop on its journey within the EU as well. So as I said, they have made some changes to the appearance. So these changes will not have an impact on your application itself, but if you are printing out the PDFs, then you'll notice that there are some changes. So the first is section 2, so the IMO or unique vessel identifier where applicable. This field will be automatically populated for you if it is applicable. Section 7 is for transshipment and or landing authorization into a port area. So that is for the landing authority to use. And then the importer declaration has been extended. And there is also changes to the import control authority sections and an addition of section 13, which is refusal of a certificate. So if the consignment is refused for any reason, it will be marked down on the certificate as to why. And then we've got processing statement. So there are minimal changes to the template itself. The PDF will stay very similar, but there are changes to the requirement. So whereas previously you didn't need a processing statement for domestically caught fish that was then processed in the UK prior to export, you will now need a processing statement for any domestically caught fish that is then processed on land in the UK before it is exported. And they've also introduced a definition for when a processing statement is required. So this is the EU's definition for when a processing statement is required. So it's required for anything including cutting, filleting, canning, smoking, salting, cooking, pickling, drying, or preparing fish for market in any other manner. Fishery products subject only to freezing and or packaging will not require a processing statement. We have gone back to clarify this with the EU, and they have said, essentially, if the fishery product undergoes anything other than freezing, cleaning, or packing, then it will require a processing statement. And this is just the snippet from the legislation that is to show that the processing statement is required for domestically caught and domestically processed fish after landing in approved establishments. So I've got a little scenario here just to help it make sense. So if vessel Amber G lands 1,000 kilograms of gutted cod and Andy buys 500 kilograms of that gutted cod to make into cod fillets, Andy needs to first create a UK catch certificate for 500 kilograms of gutted cod. And then he needs to reference that catch certificate on his processing statement and then fill in the weights afterwards. So the total landed weight is not the 1,000 kilograms landed by the vessel. It is total landed weight to be exported. The label on the box is a little misleading, but it is just what you have purchased as an exporter to be exported, but prior to any processing. And then the catch processed is the proportion of that landed weight to be exported that you have processed. So in this instance, it's the full 500 kilograms. And then the processed fishery product is the weight of the fishery product in that final, in your final product, without any other ingredients. So disregarding any sort of like breadcrumbs or oils, anything like that, you don't include that in that weight. And we have also changed the way in which you apply for a processing statement. So we are making it so that the species and products link more easily. This is to help with integration with the EU's catch system, so that all of that information can be passed over automatically. And then we have the non-manipulation document. So this was previously called the storage document, but in March, the EU introduced a new template and changed the name of the document. So doing so, they have then introduced some additional fields. The current requirements still stand. So third country consignments imported into the UK that are stored in the UK will require a non-manipulation document. If they're in transit, that can be covered by a transport document. But they have introduced a new requirement. So if a consignment is imported into the UK and it is split and then exported again, you will need a non-manipulation document for each sub-consignment, so each part that makes up that whole consignment. So they have introduced some new sections. So they have introduced the arrival to the place of storage section. This is all of the details of transport from the third country that it originated from into the UK. They've then split the consignment details into two sections. So consignment details upon arrival of the place of storage and consignment details upon departure from the place of storage. So in vast majority of cases, these will remain the same, but if that consignment is being split, then these weights may differ. And then they have added in the transport details and the point of departure and point of destination into the departure details on the non-manipulation document as well. So just to highlight, there are a list of exemptions from the IUU requirements. So everything on this list here is exempt from all 3 of the IUU documents. So anything fresh fish, aquaculture, scallops do not need a catch certificate, processing statement or storage document. Okay, so just a little bit around EU catch. So as I mentioned, this is the EU system. So it is an integrated system within the Traces NT platform. And it's an EU-wide IT system used to manage documentation relating to the import, re-export, and where applicable, export of fishery products. So it's the EU's first IT tool to streamline the checks and verifications of fishery products entering the EU's market. And the UK are looking at digital solutions for integrating with their platform. And then I have a quick policy update. So the EU's new import requirements will apply to seafood that has been imported into the UK, processed or stored, and then re-exported. Therefore, UK exporters will need to provide the same additional information for any re-exports out to the EU. So to support this, the UK is looking to change their import requirements and amend their regulation. And this change is expected to come into force around spring 2026. But ahead of that, we have been engaging with countries that export to the UK to encourage them to use the updated EU's templates and make sure that that information is provided to our exporters so that they can re-export. So what have we been doing? So up to date, we have been updating our IUU document templates and making sure that the changes are compliant with the EU's requirements. We've made updates to the application screens to allow for the completion of these new sections. And as you will have seen, they were released incrementally. So you saw there were a lot of optional fields released into the service over the last 6 months. We've been running user research sessions all across the supply chain. We've introduced the Fish Trace Ship campaign website and been doing extensive communications with the whole supply chain. We've updated our Gov guidance and we're continuing to communicate with the EU where we are still seeing issues. We've been working on the wider traceability and we have created the UK's FAQ document as well. I should also highlight here, we have now released our videos, so the YouTube tutorials on how to go through the applications. And I would like to highlight as well that we are releasing the next update on the 8th of January. So from sort of 10 p.m. on the 8th of January, the optional fields will all become mandatory ahead of the 10th of January deadline for the EU. The reason for this decision is just so that if there is any issues with the update, then this is done on a weekday and that there can be support for industry there. And also to ensure that everyone is able to create compliant certificates for exports from the 10th.